Hello and welcome to Commander Center episode 28. Today we're going to be talking about the EDH meta and how it evolves, or how you can maybe evolve it. If you are one of our YouTube listeners who doesn't want us to be political, you can think of this as us discussing your meta and how it's intelligently designed. That way you don't get offended by us discussing evolution. So this can also be the intelligent design of your meta. Either way, we're going to talk about that. Chris is face palming. You can't hear it, but he's face palming. First, as usual, we'll check in with social media and see if there's any news and discuss some games we played. I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
So how's everyone doing today?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. It's Friday.
It is. We're recording later than usual, and it is Friday, and it's a nice day, and we're about to get snowed on, so I'm gonna do
Speaking
nothing.
of snow, I'm kind of irritated with the guy who removes the snow at my place.
Why? What happened?
Beautifully cleans everything out, leaves half of my driveway at the very end of the driveway with like a 2-foot snowbank that I have to go over. I'm like, are you serious? You did everything else but this little section?
Well, I got this morning, I went out and shoveled because my snowblower makes me angry, as I've relayed on here before. So I just got done shoveling on the driveway, and the plow came through and plowed the big bank up.
Yep.
And at that point, I was like, my arms were just dead. So I'm like, I'm going to get the snowblower out. So I went and got it and wrestled with that useless thing for 20 minutes, getting my snow blowed off the end of my driveway, and brought it back inside. And my mother-in-law stayed at my house last night because it was parent-teacher conferences today, and my son didn't have school, but my wife had to go in.
Yep.
So she stayed at our house because she was watching him all day. And she's making breakfast for him, and she's like, "Oh, what took you so long?" And I'm trying to be diplomatic because she knows who the neighbor is, and I wanted him to hear me complaining. So I'm like, "Well, the snowblower hasn't been working great." And then my son goes, "Is that because?" And he said the guy's name. Has messed it up 3 or 4 times when he's tried to fix it.
Go, Declan.
And I was like, "What? Like, how do you know that?" And he's like, "Oh, I listen to your podcast." So
you should tell him to subscribe on YouTube.
I should. That's a good idea. And according to your teachers yesterday, you need to do a better job with first-time directions. So since you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to use this opportunity to pass on better first-time listening.
That's a pro-parenting move right there.
Nah, that's what I thought as well.
I see my son has an issue of being too quiet when he's at school.
What?
But if you have ever met him outside of school, he's loud and obnoxious.
I'm kind of surprised at that. Does he get that from you? The too quiet.
No.
No, not even close.
Sorry, Cindy.
How about games this week? Anyone play any fun games? Chris again was not playing much this week. You played some games without us too on Wednesday night, I think.
Monday night I played a game, and I played 1v1 tournament this weekend.
1v1. Max and I were actually there for the tournament, but we didn't play in it.
Yep.
And you finished in the top 8, but I remember
third place.
Third
overall.
place. Okay.
Congratulations.
Got knocked out by the guy who won.
Were you in any of the streamed games?
Yes, I played against an Animar deck where he did not do the mulligan rules properly and actually got penalty for it, where he couldn't take a free mulligan. He had to go down to 6.
Ooh.
Wow.
Well, I think we'll throw the link up to the game then since Chris was on streaming. We'll find a link for it.
And then I killed him very fast.
Nice.
Felt kind of mad or bad for him, but
Know the rules.
It's tournament play too.
Even on the stream, he's saying, he's like, "I was just told this like 10 minutes ago not to do this," and I'm laughing on stream. I'm like, "Man, I sound like a jack of peanut butter on stream." So,
Well, how about you, Max? Any fun games?
I got to kick people's teeth in with Crush this week.
That Crush game, man, that was at one point we weren't counting the number of counters on Crush anymore because it didn't matter. It was just irrelevant at that point.
and you guys are just supposed to like swords him immediately when he hits the field.
Well, so here's where I screwed up. At one point, I put out Triangle of War, which lets you sack something to fight Crash, because he didn't have Greaves or anything on it.
Nope. I just let him build up on his own.
And I had a couple Death Touch things out, so I'm like, okay, I can just kill Crash if I need to, but why kill Crash when I can let Max swing at other people who aren't me?
Which I was doing.
Which he was doing. So I was, but this has burned me a few times in the past, and it's particularly the last weeks or months, and this is kind of a meta thing, so I guess this will play into our discussion later on, but people have gotten better at not falling for that, or at least understanding that you're just letting their creature live long enough, and then they come up with a plan to deal with your plan in a ways maybe they didn't a year or two ago. And I got burned because Max had a removal spell. I don't remember what you had.
Chaos Warp.
For my creature, so when he finally swung at me with Crash, I'm like, all right, well, I'll fight it with Triangle of War, sacrifice Triangle of War. He removed the creature because even though I sacked Triangle of War and the ability goes in the stack, the creature has to be there when it resolves, which is also a little bit of stack interaction I had never dealt with before. So I thought that was really clever. A really clever way to deal with that problem.
I patted myself on the back for that one.
And I died to the crash with infinite, essentially, counters on it. It was like 200 and some, but like...
And I think that was the turn I whipped back a Colonian Hydra, and I had Hardened Scales and Doubling Season out, and by the time it attacked, it was like a 36-36 with haste.
Were you playing against all blue decks or something?
I think
those things should never show up.
The game had just gone... It was a relatively long game, and everyone had just burned out of stuff. Like, everyone's hands had just emptied out of answers.
The Atraxa deck had cast Atraxa 4 or 5 times that game, and we all kind of took him out first.
Yeah.
Because he did have overall advantage the entire game, and then it just came down to Dana with Glissa and another guy with a Brago deck, and I just said, Dana's the bigger threat right now. Let's see what happens. And
Tormentive Hailfire would have fixed this.
Here's the funny part. He had it in the perfect fit next to him, like he was going to take it out of the deck or put it in the deck.
I had taken it out, but it was still in the deck box if I had set it off to the side.
So the entire game, we're like, yep, it's still there. Still there.
Waiting for you to like sneak it back into the game. I played one. I went and played with my neighbor last night, and I had a really good game with Mina and Den. And the guy that was playing Aurelia kind of raced ahead. It wasn't a really long game, but he had Aurelia Angels deck, and he just had Angels out and was way ahead of everybody else. And I was down to 4 life, and I top decked a Glacial Chasm, which means you don't take damage.
So it gives you 2 turns.
So it gives me 2. Oh, right.
Yep.
Right. That's not going to keep me alive long, but it bought me enough time. So I put that out, and the other player got killed. So it's on the 2 of us. Came back to me. I left it in play, so it drops me down to 2 life. And at the this is my last go. But I had a lot of stuff I could do. So what I wound up doing was I had a Greater Good in play, and I sacrificed all of my creatures except for an Oran Reef Hydra to the Greater Good to draw a bunch of cards. And then I pitched as many lands as I could. So the Oran Reef Hydra went up to like 12 or 13 counters. And then I screwed up the sequence here, because then I cast Chandra's Ignition to wipe the board.
Oh.
Leaving the Hydra up. But I also had From the Ashes, which destroys all non-basic lands, and then you replace them with basics.
Yep.
So I did that, which killed my Chasm, but I didn't care because I was getting all the landfall trigger from the basics that were coming back in. And then I cast Splendid Reclamation to bring all the lands that I'd pitched to Greater Good and that I'd lost to bring them back in. So the Hydra was up to like 40 or so. And then I had enough mana left to Blood Rush.
A Rubble Hulk?
A Rubble Hulk. Because he was out like 60 life, but that was enough for a lethal. So yep. I did the everything's coming in together to do the swinging, and I got fogged.
Oh no!
Oh no! What did he fog you with?
It was a white. It wasn't even a fog. It was a white. It wasn't Holy Day, but it was one of the white fogs.
Gotcha.
I'm like,
there's quite a few of them.
Yes,
I'm
there
like,
are.
well, that's what happens. And then I died next turn. I would have died to Aurelia, who has haste, because I'd sacrificed the Chasm.
Yep.
But I wound up dying to some direct damage spell. But I was either way, I was not going to survive. But I'm like, man, you should have just told me. But I think he wanted to let me to see what I was going to play all out, because it was like a 5-minute sequence of me doing
stuff. In case it wasn't enough to actually kill him, then you just be like, I'll just save this for the next time something like that happens.
Exactly.
But there's been enough times I've done that to somebody else where they like make this big turn play, and I'm like, sudden spoiling. So that, it happens sometimes. And I posted a picture of this on Twitter. In my Veil of the Nightclad deck, I got to cast a Kicked Rite of Replication onto a Precursor Golem. So if you don't know what Precursor Golem is, it's a 3/3 Golem. When it comes into play, it makes 2 3/3 tokens, and any spell that copies the Precursor Golem also
targets
targets it. Also makes a copy that targets any other golems in play. So when you cast a Kicked Rite of Replication,
Chris is doing math in his head.
What's the math you come up with here, Chris?
So it's going to be 5 on each 3 of them. So there's going to be 10, plus he comes into play with 2 more. So that's 5, plus another 10. So that's 15, 25 of them, if I did the math right?
It winds up, including the originals, it winds up being 27 total.
Okay.
I had to look it up, too, because I kept getting confused.
That was just like a quick guesstimate.
So it makes 27, but if you kick it a second time somehow, it makes 4 million.
Holy
so the
crap.
multiplicative math, once you have 27 out, it goes over 4 million at that point. I didn't do it a second time, obviously, but then I put all the golem tokens out, and somebody's like, "Don't worry, I got this." And the next turn, I can't remember if it was a rift or a board wipe, but I had played Vela then. So I'm like, "Well, everyone dies because all those leave. It's an exit the battlefield trigger." And he's like, "Oh man."
Oh, that's nasty. That deck is a lot of fun to watch.
I'm surprised how fun it is. It's been a fun deck. I didn't think it was going to work, but I really liked it. I also lost the game to Insurrection, which is always feels bad. For me, it feels bad.
Feels bad in general.
Yeah. And particularly, it was one of those games where there was one other deck that was really kicking. I was playing my Sigarda Enchantress deck, and there was one other deck that was kicking off, and I'm like trying to throw everything at this other player who at one point through a Fact or Fiction I knew had an Omniscience in hand. And I'm like counting his mana. I'm like, he's one away, and I gotta get through before he plays that. And then we all just die because he also had a Future Sight out.
Ooh.
To reveal the top card of his library. So at that point, he can just start playing stuff off the Future Sight, at least until he hits a land. But I'm like, okay, I got to kill him, and I got to kill, and then pass a turn, and then Insurrection, and died to my own Sigarda. I'm like, oh man. So that always feels bad. But those were my games. Did you play anything else? You played a couple.
We played on the weekend while Chris was in that
That's
tournament.
Right. One wasn't there one ridiculously long game? There was.
There was
one super long game with two newer players.
Yep.
That was pretty fun.
It was a lot of fun. I got to hose Dana out of the majority of the game, though.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, because you played.
I was playing Dramoka, and you were playing Didgeridoo.
Yep.
And we were against a Marin deck and a Sliver Overlord deck.
And you dropped.
And I dropped the Immortal Sun on turn 7.
Against a Planeswalker deck. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not great.
Dana had just the turn before used Ugin to make me lose Dramoka. I'm like, well, I did that out of order.
Right.
And so Ugin was stuck at like 3 for 2 hours.
Yeah. It was a long game.
A lot of fun, though. The Sliver player ended up winning.
Yeah.
Just brought everything out of her deck and crushed us.
Doesn't surprise me. A Sliver deck is so much synergy that they could pretty much just have to hit anything and start going, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And they were both newer players, so we kind of let them go a little bit, and then we were just beating each other up the whole time too. So that also makes a difference. But yeah, that was an interesting game.
It was fun.
I did that once, and then a new player dropped a Jingataxis on the field, and I turned right at him and said, "That's the game we're playing very well."
I feel like we've heard that story before.
I believe we have.
Just trying to teach people new players are not as all, sunshine and rainbows as they seem.
So how about news this week, Max?
Today, some Challenger decks got announced.
And those were like the full deck list for those.
The
was
full
revealed.
entire deck list. So these
is it 4 of them?
4 of them. They come out on April 6th. They'll be $30 American. And these decks look actually really good.
They're standard decks.
Yeah. Chris, you're the standard player here. Do you have any words of wisdom or what you like out of these?
I'm very mad that they're putting Chandra in that deck.
It's only a one of.
It is only one of, but still, that'll hit the price hard. But they all look to be playable decks.
Yes. Basically, standard is a format that you can pretty much play anything.
Sure.
You're going to guarantee you're going to be competitive, but you could play pretty much anything. So having them pre-built where you can just pretty much buy, sit down, and play is going to be wonderful for new players.
And they're all still fairly tweakable too. I mean, you could fix the mana base and all of them. There's more stuff you can do, but the basics are all there. There's a Fatal Push in the black one. The red one's running a couple of Braids.
The artifact one has 4 Heart of Kirans in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's good. There's a Hazaret in the red deck. There's a
Kefnet in the blue.
Yeah, I mean, there's good mythic cards. Yeah, those are excellent. They're all. Just looking at them, I was like, wow, that's good value in all those decks.
A lot of the rare lands from Kaladesh are in them.
Yeah.
Now, I hope this doesn't turn into future where they keep putting like the high chase cards into these decks so they're easy to get their hands on. I think it's going to kill the Wizards in the long run because people go pack hunting for those chase cards.
You get a tricky balance there, too, where like if all your expensive cards are getting reprinted in these kind of decks, then does it disincentivize people from buying standard packs or something? I don't know. I would think it would a little bit. But on the other hand, maybe if they do it this late in the cycle, because most of those cards that are expensive here are ones that are rotating out in 6 months anyway, in which point the value will probably drop on all of them. So maybe that's part of their plan too. They figure if they do it late enough in the rotation cycle, it won't be as big of a deal.
That could be. I mean, I just like the idea of them going back to actual playable competitive
Yes, for
decks.
sure.
Yeah.
So I thought those modern event decks were pretty cool too.
God, I would love to see another one of those.
The problem with that one is modern is so much more competitive as a format than standard. It's really tough to release a modern deck that has playable. Standard's just a whole different thing. I mean, you can release a $30 standard deck and have it be playable. That's much tougher in modern.
It is.
Maybe for $90.
Yeah, even then, man,
Right.
you're pushing it. Like that's not even.
Most modern decks are
$5.
they're very nice decks. You can build the majority of the deck for like $60, and then there's certain key cards that are like $60 a piece that you need for the deck. So
Your first 50 cards are probably 50,
Yup.
$60, and those last 10 are what really screw you. Well, lands, I guess, but still.
God, you can just run basics. You don't need the fancy lands.
Evolving Wilds all day long.
No, don't play Evolving Wilds in modern.
All right. Any social media worth talking about this week?
Not really, I guess. It's been very quiet. Everyone, I don't understand what's going on. Maybe it's the winter blues for people.
I also think that we tend to respond to stuff pretty quickly on social media, so it's nothing we need to
Right.
hit up on here like we used to as well. I will mention I got made fun of a little bit on Brainstorm Brewery episode 278. It's a good podcast. I would listen to it. It's an MTG finance podcast. It's got 3 pretty funny hosts. They have good information, and they spent a few minutes making fun of me this week because I had an order to Card Kingdom that got lost in the mail.
Oh, no.
I sent an order into Card Kingdom, or a sell order, and the envelope showed up there open. So I put them in a bubble mailer, and it arrived opened. So someone at the post office along the way slid it open, pulled out the cards, and then sent the empty envelope on. So, and I didn't get insurance on it. So they basically were, dragging me a little bit about losing my cards, and then they'd spent 5 minutes talking about whether or not you need to get insurance on stuff you send in. So it was a good segment, and I got to take a little bit of crap for it.
I'm going to have to listen to that because that's always something. Like I know that Dana does this a lot too. We trade on Deckbox.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, newer traders, ask me, do you want insurance? Do you want tracking and all that? And it's my usual go. I give them a basic spiel about it. But some I would like to listen to see what they have to say about that.
We'll post that link on YouTube as well when we put the show up.
Yep.
Max, anything else?
Well, actually, I have something I got to talk about. So a few weeks ago, I got a phone call from Ryan and Brando of Commander Cookout. And for our fans who haven't listened to them, they are a couple guys who do an EDH podcast, and pretty much every week they do a deck tech on something.
I think they usually they sober up once a week or so and try to do a podcast.
They try really hard. Well, they called me the other week and gave me their signature FU because on this show I might have mentioned that they are Canadian Bacon is slightly better than their show.
Oh, that episode.
Yeah.
Shots
So
fired.
I'm thinking we kind of need to end this rivalry that I guess I started. So I kind of been thinking that I think we need to do a deck build-off with them and have it culminate at Grand Prix Vegas because the rumor is they're going to be there, and some of us are going to be there.
I think that sounds like a fine idea.
Yeah. So I was thinking, Commander Cookout, let's do this. The gauntlet's being thrown down. We challenge you to a deck build-off, and it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to build the same commander. We're going to put some restrictions in place that we all have to follow, and maybe a couple of other surprises that we'll announce later down the road.
Sure.
If they accept.
If they accept. I can understand why they probably won't.
I mean, it's not like they're cowards. I wouldn't say that. It's just that they're weak, maybe is the word I'm looking for.
Just remember the
easily frightened.
You just got to tell him to remember the Super Bowl commercial where he's sitting there talking to all his people, and he's like, yes, we're not going to win this war. They have mounted cavalry. We have nothing. But I'll tell you something. We're out of Bud Light. And they have Bud Light. Go get them.
I think in a candidate will be Molson. I think is what they have the Molson.
So, Ryan and Brando, if you accept this challenge, you definitely know how to get hold of us. So we'll be waiting.
All right, gauntlet thrown. Okay, so Now that that's taken care of and Max has
I'm calmed down now.
got out of his system. Let's talk about Commander meta, which probably should define first. Is there an easy way to define what the meta is?
Not really for Commander.
I mean, it's basically the place where you play most frequently and the style in which people play those games. So, for example, here's an example I thought of. If everyone in your play group runs like 10 board wipes, that's going to affect how you build your deck. Or if everyone in your play group runs 5-color decks with perfect mana bases, you're going to probably run things that interfere with those mana bases and playing 5 colors in ways you wouldn't if that wasn't the case. So it's a specific set of circumstances that kind of inform how you build your decks, maybe how you play. Does that make sense?
I'd agree with that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So over the years, however, like if you're playing the same meta for not even years, like months sometimes, metas tend to shift and change and evolve or be intelligently designed for our YouTube listeners. So let's talk about like how they change. Chris, once again, giving the face palm. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like metas that change, what things shift. So let's talk about ourselves first and the meta we play in, because our meta was essentially formed by 4 people, and we're three of them right here.
Yeah, we are.
So we can kind of talk about that because we've been there since the get-go. So looking back from when we started playing together to today, what things do you think have changed in our meta? And like, is there anything you want to say about those?
Go ahead.
You were about to say something after you, my friend.
The removal game has gone through the roof since we started playing together.
Exactly what I was about to sputter out when you looked at me.
That's my first comment is way more interaction / removal.
Yeah.
Not that people didn't run it sometimes, but like I remember even having like one spell or 1 or 2 spells maybe that were removal in my decks. And I mean, now it's close to 10 probably in most of my decks.
Yeah, I run at least that, if not more.
And I would say most people, I mean, even like, I don't even know if it's been on this show, but even in the last year or 2, I remember complaining either on the air or not complaining, but just talking about it with you guys. Like, oh man, these couple people just don't ever run removal. They do now. Like everyone, for the most part, everyone in our meta is much better about doing that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, when I first started playing, I think I either ran 1 targeted removal or 1 board wipe, and that was it. Like, okay, that's good. I'm done.
Well, I remember us talking about playing at GP Minneapolis last year with a couple of like random people, and their attitude was very much when something hit the board, it was like, well, guess that's there forever.
Yeah.
Like the concept of things leaving play just did not register.
You know, and there's another meta we play in where that is the mentality, I feel like, in that other meta we play in every now and then.
Except for a lot of those guys have started playing in the card shop now.
Right.
And their decks have changed to be running more removal spells as well, I think.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one that pops up. Any other ones that you can think of?
Old school stuff that we used to do. God, I think removal is the biggest thing I can think of.
I think people are definitely, particularly thinking about you guys and myself as well. Having played as long as we've played, you just learn what cards exist.
Yep.
And then do that thing where you're like, oh, this card is slightly better than that one. Wrath of God is slightly better than Day of Judgment at the same CMC because you can't regenerate. Or this card is, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Cancel.
Oh, God.
Unravel the Aether is better than Naturalize.
Right. But there's enough of those things where, like, maybe even not something that narrow, but like people that have, I used to run Diabolic Tutor in all my decks, and over the course of 3 years, I've picked up 2 Demonic Tutors and a Vampiric Tutor.
Yep.
And that stuff, I think, is I've seen with people that I remember this guy always playing budget tutors, and he just busted out a Demonic that maybe he didn't play a year ago.
I've noticed, for me anyways, smoother mana, such as mana rocks, whatever else to make it more curve more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to before, you're just like land go, land go.
Soul Ring,
Jam
maybe.
this guy in there, land go.
There's very few. It used to be very often you didn't see anything happen on turn, first 2-3 turns of the game.
Yep.
That's pretty. It still happens. Like you hit those. It's a 100-card singleton format. You're going to hit points where you just don't draw anything good for your first 3 turns. But somebody's always doing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's real fishy when someone goes Soul Ring into Signet, and you're like, what?
I really can't think of the last time I've hit that either. It's been a while for me.
I don't think I've seen a Soul Ring in my decks in a long time.
I did it in Dramoka a couple weeks ago, but I went Soul Ring Talisman, so same thing essentially.
Yeah.
Yep.
Except I could use the Talisman.
Yeah, you could.
Yep.
One thing I have done, though, not been a while, but one thing I have started doing as well is if I don't have a use for that Soul Ring on turn 1, and I can see on turn 2, like I need 3 mana on turn 2, then sometimes I will wait and not play the Soul Ring on turn 1, and then play that second land on turn 2, and then cast a Soul Ring, and then I have the 3 mana to do the thing I was going to do. But then it isn't a turn 1 Soul Ring, and it just looks like, oh, top deck to Soul Ring.
I notice a lot of times when I see a turn 1 Soul Ring played, they're the first person who gets attacked.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
So in discussing those changes, I was thinking about all those things, and I kind of came up with 4 basic ways I think metas shift. And you can maybe agree or disagree with this or add your own, but I think number 1, you get a bit of an arms race in most metas where someone loses every game one night for 2 weeks in a row, which just happens sometimes, but sometimes it's because your decks aren't built well or whatever, and their response is, I need to put in a Guy's Cradle or put in whatever strong cards they want to put in to make their deck stronger. And then someone else has to respond to that. Even like in a simple level, I'm losing a bunch of games because I have all these ETB tapped lands, so I'm going to buy the 3 good shocks for my deck and 2 fetch lands and whatever. Their deck then functions much smoother, and they win a few more games. Then someone else is like, man, now I'm on the losing end, and maybe I need to get shocks and fetches in here too. And then a year later, everyone's just running a really good mana base.
Yep.
So I think number 1, you have an arms race that happens.
I've actually seen that quite a bit.
I don't know how you avoid it either.
I think it comes with learning to be better players, or just being excited about the format, because you see your friend playing this awesome dual land. Oh, now I have to go buy one.
Right.
But overall, you learn you need the better cards to build your decks, so they're more consistent.
To come back to you saying how you would avoid that, I think the only way to do that is to keep a deck built that is very weak, where you're running the non-so-good ones. So then when that certain player is sitting down with you and you're playing, you pull out that deck. Sure, you might lose that game because 2 other people are playing highly tuned decks, but at least you're giving that person a chance, showing them that, hey, I don't have to play with these super expensive cards to win a game.
Right. I also think there's different degrees of how those super expensive cards affect your deck. So if you are playing your 3-color deck and you eventually pick up the 3 dual lands, ABUR duals that work in your deck, that's going to make your deck better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to radically shift how your deck functions. For starters, you may well go 3 or 4 games at a time and not see any of those dual lands. And you're not going to certainly tutor for them probably. Maybe if you're in green, you're going to get one with your Skyshroud Claim or whatever. But for the most part, those are going to make your deck efficient over the course of 50 games. But it's not going to maybe change one game versus putting in and just being I need an Omniscience for this deck or something. That is going to make your deck function much differently because you could tutor that up and then just win the game with it.
Yep.
So I think there's two ways that goes in terms of the power creep or the arms race. Some arms race things just make decks on average better over the course of, playing 50 games. And some cards just specifically make you win the game when you play them. And I think we see a lot more of the first, where everyone's decks have gotten better mana bases and gotten more efficient and whatever. But that's kind of a slow creep that doesn't always make a difference. For example, I don't see many mana crypts. I don't see many mana vaults either. I don't see much fast mana.
No.
And usually when I do see them, they're in a deck that needs them.
Right.
Or abuses them.
Yeah, or abuses them.
But even then, but it's not that frequent. So I just think we don't see the broken or broken combo pieces where someone's going to grab a food chain for this deck because they know they can auto win with a food chain combo. So I think there's 2 different ways that works, and most of our arms race stuff is in terms of efficiency versus just outright winning games with busted cards.
Yep. If you guys, I don't know if anyone reads Cardboard Crack, I know they don't do it anymore, but this arms race leads me back to a comic that they did of a guy walking into a card store, buys 4 Tarmogoyfs, all around hooting and hollering, yeah, I got Tarmogoyfs, I can't be beaten. Shows him sitting down and playing a game. He goes, Tarmogoyf. He's like, haha, now you can't win. And his opponent goes, Doomblade. And he goes, you can't kill my Tarmogoyf with a 50-cent card.
Some of the negative side of the arms race, and this is speaking from personal experiences, when I first started playing Magic with the friends that taught me, it was, oh, you're playing this really cool, expensive card that did something specific for their deck.
Right.
But I bought it because it was super powerful and cool, and when I put it in my deck, it did nothing. Like,
sure.
Kind of time walked you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I think if you aren't aware of the game or even why that card is in someone's deck, even though it's really powerful and really good, you know, you get hit with that negative, great, I just spent $50 on this card that doesn't do me anything except for what the card says. It doesn't interact with anything else in my deck.
Right.
I just lost money in air quotes because you could put in another deck or trade it away or probably resell it, but overall, you feel like you're out the money because you can't use that card right now.
The example I was kind of thinking of too here specifically was like if you're playing an Azorius deck of some sort and you spend $250 on a Tundra for that deck, that's probably not going to make a huge difference. You spend the money on the Time Twister, that can make that's the example I was thinking of in terms of those big cards can make, but they also may not. You can we've seen those decks where people, like you said, maybe your Time Twister doesn't do anything if your deck isn't built to take advantage of it. So you just spent a bunch of money in this arms race, not actually accomplish anything, when you've been way better off spending $15 and bought a few better lands or something. So, all right, the second one I was thinking of is basically player evolution, and players get better. Like the more you play, the better you get, and that changes how the meta plays too. I mentioned this in the games we played thing with the Triangle of War. Or just basically like leaving a rattlesnake thing out there to let someone's game-ending creature kill my opponents, and it's burned me. It didn't always burn me, and it burns me much more frequently than it used to. And the specific example I was thinking of for this isn't Magic-based, but in high school I used to play basketball every morning before school with a few friends, and I specifically remember having this realization that like as a freshman or sophomore when we were playing, this one friend of mine would oftentimes like try to fade back and take a 3-pointer. And I learned very quickly to let him, I wanted him shooting that 3-pointer because he missed so badly. So when I'd see him like make that move, I'd just fade back and get ready for the rebound. That didn't last because at one point in time, by the time we were like juniors or seniors, he had became a good shooter.
Yep.
And I no longer could just let him take that 3-point shot. He, as a player, changed how I had to then play my game. And I think in Magic you see that too. Your meta shifts as people play Commander more and more.
Yeah, they learn the rules more. I noticed that especially around our area, a lot of people have been really in depth with rules and figuring out how interactions happen.
Yes. And how to stop weird things from happening, or how to make weird things happening with your specific cards.
Oh yeah.
So that absolutely shifts the power level of the meta as well. And that is something that you definitely can't fix, and I don't think you want to. You want people to be playing at their best.
I agree with that. I guess for most players out there, whoever's listening, good thing to do is if you have the MTG Familiar app, they have all the rules in there.
Yes.
So you can learn all your layers and everything else that you need to learn, your combat tricks, what you can do during combat, which will help you to become a better player. Because then you know the rulings, so you know the little ins and outs of things.
Right. I would say the downside of that one, though, is that's a difficult thing to compensate for when you're playing new players.
I have a really hard time doing that.
Yeah. Like, it's one thing to be like, okay, I'm playing a new player, so I'm going to grab my weakest deck and maybe slow roll it a little bit. You can control that.
Yep.
But you can't control just being good and understanding like what a good play is. So that's always going to be a disadvantage for newer players to a meta.
I tend to, for newer players, as Chris said, our meta is kind of rule intensive, where I'll understand the interactions really well. I actually stopped myself this past week when we were playing that game with that Brago player, because he hit someone with Brago and he had 2 or 3 things on the battlefield and he didn't target them. He just was like, okay, I'm going to blink this and then blink this and then blink this. And I bit my tongue really hard because I wanted to be like, next time, please target everything, because we do technically get responses to every target instead of you just willy-nilly like, okay, yep, oh, and then Brago will blink at the end.
Whenever I play your Brago deck, I go, and I'm going to blink everything and
Yep.
see if anyone responds.
But that's a stack interaction people don't think about, particularly if you're a newer player.
And I honestly, I had that Chaos Warp at that time, and none of this stuff was super threatening to me. But if there had been, I technically missed an interaction if he didn't declare what he was targeting, because Brago was almost an afterthought to him, because he started to go to his second main phase. He's like, oh yeah, and Brago blinked too, so he got essentially pseudo vigilance.
Yep.
And maybe that just comes from me having the deck and have been playing it for 2 years. I just know you have to do that, but at the same time, the card says target.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's part of that turn. I mean, it's part of that combat phase. So the third one I was thinking of, third type of meta change to deal with is basically when players come or go. Like, your meta, depends how big it is, I suppose. If you're playing with 50 people that come in out of your meta and 1 or 2 people leave, you might not care. But if you're playing with a 10-person meta and 1 person takes off and or 5 new people show up, that can really shift how everything works too. Particularly if those people have a different idea of how they want to play the game than the existing play group does.
Well, I know. We'll just take our meta for instance. I know that there is technically, we could cut that into 2 different groups. There's a group of the younger kids who are there, who are playing mainly for fun, playing jank decks, and then there's us who have our more intensive decks, want to win the game type of deal.
Sure.
And when you mesh those 2 metas together, things go a little sideways.
Oh, my head hurts after those type of games.
But I do think everyone is really good about not being our meta is really good about everyone being friendly and not being jerks about it and powering down things when you're playing with those other players. When I think, for example, we've had I've mentioned my neighbor, him and his friend, the 2 of them are both new to Magic just in general.
No. No, they are not.
Well, at this point, I would say, yes, you're right, they're not. But at this point, they play on the level with anyone in the shop. They play. I don't feel like I have to power anything down with them for the most part.
And that's all your fault.
That's all my fault.
It is all your fault.
It isn't part of my fault.
I'll blame you for that. I'll still take the blame for Commander Cookout.
But no, that's like they've gone from what's Magic in 6 months to being able to sit down and roll with anybody in the shop. So that's something you can do. Like the meta we play in is one that you can catch up if you want to, and they for the most part have.
I also think that kind of shows credit to our meta. We're a very teaching heavy meta.
For sure, absolutely.
New players walk in that shop and we will help you learn your own deck. We will.
That is a double-edged sword, though. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah, hence.
Well, you have to be very careful how you have to be careful how you phrase it too. Yep. Like you don't want to, because you can very easily come across as a jerk.
Yep.
But I think everyone for the most part does a really good job of that too.
Well, there's some people that I know don't see them anymore, but I know a few of them who did not come across as nice.
Well, and the meta works in a way that they aren't there anymore too.
Yeah.
The last one I will talk about is maybe evolutions to the game itself. So there's a new expansion that comes out, or a new set that comes out every roughly 3 months.
Yeah.
So if you put 1 card from that new set in your deck, because it's presumably, I would assume, because it's better, times 5 cards a year.
4 or 5, yeah, okay.
That adds up
a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, that adds up a lot. And it's just how the game works. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Everyone does that. Like, every expansion that comes out, we do it in this show. We have an episode every expansion where we talk about that.
Yes,
I'm going to replace this with this, or if you're running this, you should replace it with this card. So just like by virtue of new cards getting printed, everyone's deck gets better every year.
Yeah.
Well, I can take that and put that right into personal experience for the 1v1 tournament I was in. I'm actually running 5 cards from the standard block in that deck because they are better than any of the other cards, the mono red cards that there are out there.
And not only then do you have that aspect of adding new cards to decks, you have reprint sets where the cards become affordable that once weren't affordable or even available.
Hey, I'll buy that $10 Iconic Masters pack and hope for a mana drain.
Right.
Cool, I pulled one versus, I can't really spend $200 on a mana drain prior to the reprint.
Yeah.
Or your shop just didn't have one. A lot of shops just didn't have a mana drain in the case, and now they do.
I think our shop, I looked at the binder the other night, there were 4 or 5 of them in there. No foils, though. I was
And
sad.
it doesn't even have to be something like crazy like Mana Drain. It can be as simple as Austere Command at $14. $14 isn't nothing. That's like a good amount of money for a lot of players.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people that probably are like, oh, I can't put an Austere Command in my deck because I just can't spend 14. I can spend 4. So how many decks have gotten stronger and then therefore altered the meta just by virtue of Austere Command dropping by that much?
The one that I was thinking of was Mishra's Bauble. Because not
Yeah.
every deck is going to run a Mishra's Bauble, but that card was expensive for
It's
the
a
decks
$40 to $50 card.
that wanted it. And now it got reprinted, and it's like $450
Yeah.
for the reprint.
Or Phyrexian Arena that's been reprinted like 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years or whatever it is, which is, it's still not nothing, but it's still like, what, $5, $4 or so? But it was 12 or 13 at one point in time.
Yeah, I remember getting my first one for close to 20.
I would bet land tax gets reprinted. We'll find out next week, but I bet land tax is going to be in M25 because it hasn't been reprinted since.
The Judge foil?
There's a Judge foil, which of course there's not many of those. Prior to that, it was
Fourth
edition, I think, and it's over 25, I think now.
Yes.
That sees play nowhere, but that's a commander card, and so that will drop. I guarantee. I mean, that'll get halved in value, and not only will it get halved in value, you'll see those in cases and stores that maybe you don't see right now.
Yep.
So that will change metas as well because land tax now becomes available to a lot of people.
I do love it when new sets come out because I always want to see how people's decks evolve.
Yes, I do too. I love doing that. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised. There's always cards that you think are going to start popping up that don't, and ones that you're surprised to see pop up that do.
What I find interesting is the cards that you suspect that are going to pop up right away. They really don't until maybe even after standard rotation, if it's a standard card, like Chandra's Ignition. We didn't see it a lot when it was in standard in our decks.
No?
Mm-mm.
Now it's a staple in
I
all
see
of my
a
red
ton
decks.
of Chandra's Ignitions now.
Such a good card.
So good.
I saw it twice last week, and then my neighbor Steve dropped it on me last night. The white
Hour of Revelation.
Which we all said when the set came out, like, oh, that's always going to be a 3-mana board wipe. But I have not seen. I didn't see much play. I've seen it cast 3 or 4 times in the last week.
Really?
So that started to catch on too, which it should. Like that's a great card.
Yeah.
And it's still cheap. It's like
3 mana planar cleansing is great.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff shifts and changes as well.
On top of that, besides just new cards or reprints entering the game again, rules changes make the game evolve.
I didn't even think of that. That's true.
We kind of touched on this during our ban list and rule change episode, but when Tuck went away, that totally reworked the entire game. All of us changed how we build decks, how we plan our moves, and now I don't care. I don't run a bunch of Tuck cards. I mean, I run Chaos Warp in my red decks, but I don't run Terminus. I don't run Hallowed Burial anymore just because you don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
I don't run Spin into Myth anymore, which was the blue one that Fate sealed.
Yep.
I had that in, I think, 2 decks at the time, and I don't run that anymore. Spell Crumple and Hinder were like premier counterspells at the time, and they're not terrible now, but like at the time I felt like if you're building a blue counterspell deck, you ran both of those because the ability to just bury a Derevi or something in the bottom of someone's deck was amazing. And I honestly don't think I've seen either of those 2 counterspells cast in years, maybe.
I have. But it's usually a deck that's dedicated to doing stuff like that because you really got to start scraping the bottom of the barrel
Right.
for some
Yeah.
counter
Right.
spells.
And someone on YouTube commented about those cards.
still run 'em.
And they still run them because
Yeah.
they have a very aggro meta. So, yeah, I'll bury that Crater Hoof in
Yep.
your
Right.
deck versus your
Yep.
graveyard. So, I mean,
Well,
They
I
do
don't
have
need
their
you
place.
reanimating that
Right.
thing.
in that meta, it's a great call.
Yeah.
So that absolutely makes sense. Also, I think the change to why can't I think of it? Oh my god,
the color mana.
The mana color one made a bit of a difference for some decks. The change to the mulligan rule also made a big difference in how I built decks. I added more lands in all my decks.
Same here.
As
Now
did
I think that's changed. I've pulled that extra land back out in a lot of my decks because my decks have gotten leaner, which is also meta change. And
Yep.
most of people's decks have as well. Most of the decks we play with, people's CMCs have dropped. Okay, so So I think we've gone over all the big changes we see and the basics of metas and how they evolve. Are there any things with metas shifting or metas evolving that you guys don't like, or that you've seen that happen that you think are a problem, or that you've pushed back on, or can you push back on it?
I don't know if you can push back on it. I was going to comment that it, I guess, annoys me where you have those few people that don't want to adapt to the meta.
Sure.
For the type of deck they play is super against the meta, and a lot of people complain about that guy's one deck because it only does this one thing, yet he doesn't want to build another one or change it to adapt to the meta, make the games more fun or last longer, or they don't lose every game.
Sure. I think I think we don't have to I think that happens less for us than it maybe happens at a lot of shops, because number one, we kind of started the meta. So by default, from the beginning, it kind of reflected the way we all played. Number two, we're a couple years older than a lot of the people, and
more than a couple.
More than a couple in some cases.
I'll take the couple. It's fine.
But there's a bit of what are those guys doing? And the kids kind of do a little bit look to see what we're doing, so that they kind of emulate that a little bit. We're all very outspoken, or
I'm
not in a bad way,
model.
but
Yuck.
but kind of it does make a difference. People regularly ask us for advice in their decks, once a week, if not maybe once every other week. But someone will hand you a deck and say, "Can you take a look at this and tell me if you have any ideas?"
Mm-hmm.
Or ask advice on cards. Something. I think that also in our case makes our meta kind of shift around us in ways that maybe some metas don't.
I do enjoy what the kids do in our shop. They come up with weird ways of playing the game to make it more enjoyable.
They do a lot of alt game format stuff.
Yes, just to make it enjoyable for everybody. I mean, because some of the kids are young, high school age. They can't afford all this stuff. So let's make this game fun and playable, where you could totally just raffle stomp us, and we can't do anything about it because of the way that we set up this game.
I also think they do that. There's an element of, because it's those, it's this group of 4 friends that go to school together that are in high schole. They probably play a lot of games together too.
Probably.
So that, they need to shake things up a little bit to keep things interesting. How about soft rules in our meta? Are there any specific ones? Because I was talking to a guy on Twitter a little bit. JD of Commander had asked this question, and we've had a few exchanges back and forth. And he was talking about soft bans in your meta and how you deal with them, and if you just accept it or do you push back on it. And I was just thinking, there isn't anyone that's written down, but there are a few things that we just don't see much of.
Yeah.
We can just tell everyone to stop playing Insurrection.
I really don't have a problem with it. I think people should absolutely run it.
I feel like I have to take a shower after I lose that card.
And after I win with it.
Right. Well, I think to a degree that's a thing that there's a bit of, I wouldn't say a soft ban, but
distaste.
In winning with, whether it's maybe Omniscience a little bit, or even maybe Torment, at least for me. Those cards are just winning, no one has a counter spell, I win.
Yep.
We don't see a lot of that. I wouldn't say there's a soft ban on it, but people just, for the most part, don't play with many of those cards.
Yeah.
Games do have to end though, so there's some of that kind of stuff, and that's fine.
You really want to troll people during our meta, we could go hard rules and say no more life totals with dice. Have to use paper, because that is now an official Wizards rule.
Yeah.
There's not enough room on the table for that in a 4-player pod.
That's why I have a boogie board.
Land I know a lot of metas are really against mass land destruction. We just don't. It never really comes up that frequently.
No.
I know a couple players that have there's a Kalia deck in the shop that runs a little bit of it, but his goal is to get Avacyn out and cast it. Well, okay, we're just going to lose then. That's fine. We don't see
even with a card like Kalia's with the land destruction, he doesn't need his lands anymore once she's on the field.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if the lands were to get destroyed somehow, you're still probably going to lose with Kalia out. So
I mean, I guess for mass land destruction, I guess it depends on your meta and how you're playing. If you have players who have their deck revolves around their general hit in the field and they don't need anything else other than that, and their deck plays land destruction, you should not be upset about that, because they're going through a theory of their deck of how this deck is supposed to be played. It's not like they're just trolling everybody.
I'm going to kill everyone with Zergo Helm Smasher, because I can 3-shot people, and I can save you can save your lands if you can do it at instant speed too.
Yep.
because Zerg gives yourself indestructible. So that's just part of winning the game. I do read, like, whether it's on Reddit or on MTV Salvation, some metas have people that they run land destruction as like an anti-ramp tactic.
Interesting.
And I feel like, man, that, first of all, I don't think ramp is, again, maybe this is a meta thing. People ramp plenty. I see plenty of games, but I never feel like if I'm not playing green, I'm at some ridiculous disadvantage. Obviously, they have an advantage playing green, but I've also seen plenty of those decks where they ramp out 7 lands by turn 4 and then proceed to keep drawing ramp spells while everyone else is then doing things with the game. Like, if you have too much ramp, it can burn you too.
Yep.
Yeah, totally have been there.
So I guess that's something that we just don't have to deal with, but I know that's...
I would have no problem playing in a multiplayer game if someone ran 25 targeted land removal spells over mass removal.
Sure, because you have to make the decision then.
Yep. And all they're going to do is they're going to look and say I'm playing a 3-color deck and I have 1 white source, and be like, take you off a white. That sets me up for a better advantage during the game.
Yeah.
I actually, when I was playing last night, had one, whatever color source it was. It was green. It was in my Mina and Den deck. I was playing like the first game with it, not the one I described earlier. I only had 1 green source, and on turn 4, my neighbor strip mined it. So I couldn't cast
Pro play.
Bravo.
And then proceeded to realize he couldn't cast his commander because he was short 1 mana, and then sat there for like 5 turns unable to top deck the land to do anything. And so I was like, man, I thought I was making a really clever play there, but man, I burned myself more than I burned you. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that can happen too, like if you're doing that. But I think that those are the big things. Like, and those aren't even really soft. I just don't see that many people complaining. The only thing I would say is I don't see many people running like super easy 2-card combos. And the few times you do see somebody doing it, they usually kind of get made fun. They kind of get made fun of to the point where they just don't do it. So I think that's maybe the disincentive.
One of my decks, I do run the Mike and Trike combo, and I never play it. It's usually like very late game, and I'm just like, you know what? Enough of this. I'm just going to jam this in here. If it resolves, cool, let's start another game.
What
if
deck
not,
is that even
whatever.
in? Like, I can't even say I've ever seen it cast.
I had it in Mogus and I have it in Campbell. But I never play both pieces because it's just degenerate.
Yeah.
Sure.
But if the game goes on forever, then I'll just jam them in and say, let's go to another game.
And no one's going to care at that point.
Yeah.
It's the person who's running like the mono black Macias deck with 9 tutors, and he's trying to tutor for it every chance he can get.
Yep.
Whether it's Triskelion or Ballista or whatever. That's a different thing. But no, I have never ever seen that in our meta. So like, that's not something we really deal with either.
See, I wouldn't be surprised if people are like me. They do have the combo in there, and they just don't go for it unless they need to go for it. Type of deal.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to touch on here? We're talking about metas shifting. You just kind of got to ride it. It's just going to happen.
Yep.
Like, you can't fight against that.
No, you can't.
Time changes things, and your meta is going to shift. Now, maybe it'll shift in a way like, because there is thing like, I wouldn't want to play in a meta where everyone was running EDH level decks and trying to combo it on turn 4 consistently. That doesn't interest me. Like, I don't have a problem with you if that's your thing, but I don't want to do that. That's not something that interests me at all. So I can see like there are situations where if that's what your meta has turned into, maybe that's not, you can't fix that, and you can't go along with it if you hate playing that way. There's some metas I've seen people online talk about where it's all chaos. There's a bunch of chaos decks, and that doesn't interest me either.
Nor does it.
I like that every once in a while. Not very often. Every once in a while, it's fun to just sit in a game and you're playing. It's like, well, let's just see what happens.
And even then, I think I get my taste of that because we do a plane chase game once in a while. I'm like, that shakes it up enough for me. I'm good. I've got my one plane chase game every other month, and good enough.
I guess the one thing I have to say still is that you just got to be aware of your meta and other metas in general. I mean, if you go out of town and you find a game shop, you don't assume their meta is your meta. You know, if you are in that CEDH meta and you walk into a random game shop, watch some people play, or do sit down and be like, hey, be prepared to know that your combo deck is probably not going to be liked, or it might be liked, but come prepared to play in a not as competitive meta usually.
I know a few years ago when we really tuned up our decks hard, there was a game that I sat down with a couple of new kids, and I asked them straight up. I was like, okay, how competitive are we playing? Like, oh, this is just for fun. I'm like, okay, this deck gets put away, and we take out this one instead.
The one thing I would say to be cautious of is people oftentimes, though, don't understand the power level of their deck, because there's enough situations where someone's like, oh yeah, we play really, some pretty competitive Magic, and I'm like, all right, well, let's see what goes on. I'm like, no, you don't.
You bust out Sigarda and
right, yeah,
done.
It's just even that strong of a deck anymore.
No.
But like, it is in some metas.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, if you are unsure, watch a game for a few minutes and just see what's going on, because you can tell within a few minutes of watching a game, like, oh, no one's running interaction here, no one's running removal here, or, oh man, everyone just opened Lotus Petal Mana Vault. Like, okay, well, that's a different thing too.
Another tip is talk to the shop worker, because they might know. I mean, I bet if you walked into D20 and you asked Phil or Nate or Savannah, like, what type of meta is EDH here, all of them will give you probably a close enough answer to each other.
Yep. Well, that's another thing. If you don't, like, for your meta, say your meta becomes very degenerate, you could do what our own LGS owner does in his 5-color Planeswalker deck that he calls No One Gets Nice Things.
Just destroys everything.
All he does, he just destroys everything.
Sure.
And tries to lock you out of the game. Like, if you guys want to play degenerate and horribly play, I'm just going to say no to everything you do.
Well, and I think, having talked to Phil a little bit too, I think his perspective on the meta has changed. I think he, once upon a time, thought we were maybe more competitive players than we really are. But I think he's kind of also realized it's not that we're competitive, it's just our decks are relatively tuned. It doesn't mean we're going to, like, win in turn 4, but we're going to have answers for everything all game long. I remember him commenting, like, oh, because his Progenitus deck, his Planeswalker deck, I think wherever he was previously playing was considered really, really strong. And it's not that it's not strong now. It's that when he sits at a table, he's looking at people whose opening hands are going to have 2 removal spells. And so it's no longer simply a case of playing a few Planeswalkers and eventually winning the game. They're going to get removed.
I trolled him so hard one day playing my Alesha deck, and he's playing that deck. He's just like, just blowing up everything. I'm just like, Gonti? Looked at his... Oh, that's a nice Planeswalker. Take that one.
Oh, no.
Blink Gonti. Oh, that's an Ugin. We'll take that one. And then return to fire right back at him with his own Planeswalkers.
And that isn't necessarily a power level. That's like an efficiency thing more than it is anything. So, yeah, that stuff is really kind of in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
Any final comments before we wrap it up?
I mean, I got some stuff, but I don't really... I guess the only other thing I could say is if you're playing in a meta with players that you don't like, maybe just talk to them. Bring it up to them. I know a lot of people that I play with come across as kind of dinkish people, but if you sit down and actually talk with them and say, hey, you know what, how we're playing, it's getting a little out of control. Can we do something about it? They're willing to talk with you about it at least.
Not that there aren't situations where there are people that are just jerks and you can't play with them, because we've had a few of those. But they tend to get cycled out of the meta because no one wants to play with them.
Yep.
So they just stop showing up because now they may still blame, it's just a bunch of jerks at that shop, but fine.
Maybe you should have told me that half the cards in my deck were not the right cards to be playing.
Right, exactly. Or you shouldn't have got caught cheating. Not that we're thinking of anyone in specific. How about you, Max? Any final thoughts?
No, not at all.
All right.
You guys just summed up everything I wanted to say.
All right. Well, we're going to come back next week, and we touched on this earlier about reprint sets. So next week we should have the full spoilers for M25 out.
And I'm going to go into depth about that murder.
All right, for the murder reprint. Yeah. That's the one I've been waiting for, is murder.
Yes. Don't have any.
So we're going to talk about that set, but we're also going to kind of at a higher level talk about reprint sets in general and reprints and how they affect Commander and pricing and all that kind of stuff. So we'll look at that next week. Until then, this is Commander Central, and I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.